The interesting thing about them is who told them they had a calling? Who told?
They both had
Direct?
direct from calling from God.
From the
From the Spirit.
Spirit of God,
The Spirit.
who entered them when?
From the very beginning.
At birth?
Well, no.
Okay, conception?
Conception.
In their mother's womb.
Right.
I think you've got to say a little bit of, as they got cognizant, became cognizant, they heard the word of the Lord. So their parents directed them towards the Old Testament.
Matter of fact, who made the decision how John the Baptist was going to run his life?
No. No, the angel told Zechariah.
Angel told Zechariah, who told, and what's it called? What he had a Nazarite vow. He lived his life because of the direction of his parents. And did he remain consistent with that? Now, how did the individual callings shape the way they approached their work? Who said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased"? God? For who?
Jesus.
For Jesus. What was he pleased with? Everything about him. What do when you hear that sermon preached, most people preach, he was pleased that here was a man who was his son, who was going to become the Savior of the world, who was going to go to the cross, who was going to go without sin. I'd like to suggest to you that he had 30 years of great work. Not the 30 years he was going to do later. I am absolutely pleased with the way you worked. And by the way, his major work was with his family, and the kids thought his brothers and sisters thought what about him? Mary, at this point when he was 12, 13 years old, now becomes a single mom with 5 kids. At least. Did that shape his work?
Yes.
Where did he learn how to be a carpenter? Which in those days would have been probably a stonemason. From who? From Joseph. He learned probably the family business. He was taking care of his mom all the way to the cross when he finally turned to his friend and said, "Behold, woman." Remember that? Family and parenting have a huge place in a person's life, and it's not always the perfect family. When God decided to choose a parent for his own son, he didn't go out and find the perfect 35-year-old woman who had all the skill and said, "I'm going to trust you with the responsibility of raising my son sinlessly." No. He took an unwed teenage girl and said, "I trust you and I believe in you." I want you to know that their background, their childhood, their involvement with their family, their interaction with their parents had a great deal to do with how they went about their call. And what was the predominant issue at the end of their lives? Between John the Baptist and Jesus, what was the predominant issue at the end? Are you
who you? Yeah, are you the one?
Are you really it? Now, these are cousins. They've known each other from almost the womb, when they were kicking mom, when, showed up. In that scene, at the end of 33 years, one was questioning, are you really who you say you are? Why is that? Why would one, obviously who knew him, obviously who would have cared for him, obviously there was respect for one another?
He's the first one who said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So, it was clear in John's mind. So it's always befuddling to me when I think of him being in the dank dungeon or he had doubt. But Jesus clarified it.
Jesus clarified it, but he was absolutely confused. He was human.
And he was in pain.
Okay?
And Jesus wasn't measuring up to his expectations.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, but I was going to say it's in two different respects. On the one hand, the work and ministry of Jesus didn't look at all like what the Jews had expected the Messiah to look like, so I certainly agree with that. But I also think it's partly also that John's ministry and what he expected in his, kind of walking out of his call with God was suddenly looking like it was turning out really badly and entirely differently than probably he expected. And he doesn't know it, but he's in fact about to be beheaded even, to be beheaded. So it's that bad. And so I think it's a combination of the macro level ways in which John was saying Jesus doesn't look like he matches the expectations, as well as his own sense of, boy, this whole thing of my walking out my role with God doesn't look like it's playing out at all the way I expected either.
Hold that thought, because you're right on. Oh,
We didn't hear.
say it loud.
One went to solitude, the other into relationship.
Wow.
Okay? We're going to come back to both of those. They're absolutely right. And they fit each other. But let me just move on here really quickly. My dad, he was 77 years old, 1990, found out that he had pancreatic cancer on a Friday, and I had dinner with him, and my wife met with my mom, and I met with Dad, and we talked. And as the young pastor, I said to him, I was going to be really spiritual. Dad, is there any unfinished business? Now, if pancreatic cancer is probably the most aggressive. We didn't know at the time. He had no clue. 10 days later, he was dead. Found out he had cancer. He started feeling bad on Monday. He found out he had cancer after all the tests were confirmed on Friday, and 10 days later, he was dead. This was our last conversation together. And I said, Dad, is there any unfinished business? Anything you want me to do? Anything I can help you with? Even though he was going to beat cancer with Epsom salt. Okay? Everything in his life. He had been sick 3 days in his life. He had missed 3 days of work, and he was still working at 75. And those 3 days, he solved it with Epsom salts. So, as far as he was concerned, Epsom salts was going to do it again. He was not planning on dying. But he said to me, well, there is one thing, Lowell. Make Dennis listen to Ray about mission, and make Ray listen to Dennis about business. Okay? Now, he had just come from the Mustard Seed board meeting, which is our family foundation, and that family foundation is where actually Dad began to have some symptoms. He didn't know they were symptoms. We didn't know they were symptoms, but he did think that my sister-in-law was poisoning him to death because he couldn't taste anything. She was a gourmet cook, and he said, you got to tell Dennis that his wife is going to kill him. The food is terrible. And a few other things like that. Ray, this prophetic voice, this missional historical theologian, this person who analyzes power from the bottom up. He understands systems from the grassroots level to the top. He's become a sage by this time. He's 52 years old. He said, how many are 52? You're in the prime of your life. You know it. You're at the peak of your, Ray was 52 at the time. And you think his vision is okay now? His vision then was absolutely amazing because he was ahead of everybody else. And it was just so much fun to see what he was doing. Sure, Dad, you want me to tell Ray something. Ray hasn't listened to me much in life, Dad. I didn't want to tell him that, but then I said, well, there is Dennis, Dennis is that steward. He doesn't look at life as a theologian, and he's not a prophet, but he is a missional business creator. And Dennis, from the time he was 5 years old, had power. He didn't need to find it and understand it. He attained it and he kept it. He was amazing. And I had to follow him. And one of the things that I did with his, at 5 years old, he had his first business. I was his first employee. My employment, he created a kindling business for his uncles in Seattle. We were up in the woods. You know where we were there. That first bundle of kindling, he sold for $2.50 a bundle. He needed my finger to tie the knot. I was 2. My finger got in there, got bloody every time. I got a penny. He got $2.49. Yes, he was, and there's when you study his book or whatever, you'll find out Stanford has a case study on his school. It's the case of the missing human relations department. There's no HR department. And there certainly wasn't one when I was around, because I was there with my finger and my penny. That's what I got. By the time he ended high school, he had more money than my folks through business. He went to college, to the University of Puget Sound, at 18 years old, went to the Weyerhaeuser Foundation because he saw a ad in Weyerhaeuser looking for an efficiency expert. And he said, I think I'm going to do that. He applied as a freshman in college at Weyerhaeuser. He just turned 18. Now, he learned how to be efficient by arguing with my mother, who was an efficiency genius, even though she had no schooling. And they argued their entire lives, what is the most efficient way to do everything? Wash dishes. They ran a catering business together. Everything, the two of them argued. Denny never listened to me either. And I'm sitting here, Ray, Denny, Dad, you want Ray to listen to Dennis, Dennis, you want to listen to Ray. And I looked at myself and said, how in the world? I had no clue. I thought Dad might have been joking, but the more I thought about it, and I realized, no, Dad was dead serious. He had just seen his 2 sons at a board meeting continuing to do what they always did, which was to argue. Now they didn't argue directly. They simply saw things from different points of view. Do you know anybody like that? You love them dearly, but you think they're nuts? You would never tell them they're nuts, but you understand. They look at things so opposite to one another, and they have been on each other's boards and each other's organizations for 50 years. And I want you to know something. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. So I'm sitting here saying, Dad, what in the world, how can 2 brothers living at the same time, raised in the same context, nurtured by the same family, filled with the same spirit, have such a different view of leadership, calling, and ministry? How does that happen?